Good evening and welcome to Majors and Quinn. My name is Sarah and I'm one of the booksellers here. I'm so pleased that you're joining us to celebrate Eileen Flanagan's new book, Common Ground. A few housekeeping things before we go on with the show. Tonight you will hear from Eileen, then there will be a time at the end of the program for audience questions. After Q&A, please allow Eileen to move to the signing counter, which is the glass display case you passed on your way to the store. You may line up there, say hello, and get a signed copy of the book tonight. If you do buy a book here this evening, you're not only supporting our author, but also a locally owned independent bookstore, and we cannot thank you enough. Finally, please allow me to introduce our guest. Eileen Flanagan is an award-winning Quaker author, public speaker, and leader of the spiritually grounded climate activism. As board chair of Earth Quaker Action Team, she helped develop and implement the strategy that successfully pressured one of the largest banks in the U.S. to stop financing mountaintop removal coal mining. Later, as EQAT campaign director, she played a key role in launching the global campaign against Vanguard, the world's largest investor in fossil fuels. Ahead of the 2020 election, she became the trainings coordinator of Choose Democracy, which trained nearly 10,000 people in non-violent strategies to prevent a coup. The first in her Irish working-class family to go to college, she earned a BA from Duke and an MA from Yale. Please join me in welcoming Eileen Flanagan.
Great, thank you. It's really great to be back in Minneapolis, where I haven't been for a few years. Because this book is about bringing people together, it's not going to be just me talking tonight. We have a few interesting parts, starting with an icebreaker for you all. I'm going to ask you to reflect on what you think the subtitle of this book means, and to find a buddy to share it with, preferably someone who you don't know already. Extra points if you find a partner of a different generation.
I choose you.
Oh, it has to, and we are in favor of consent here, so make sure your partner is also happy to talk to you. The book is called Common Ground, and the subtitle is How the Crisis of the Earth is Saving Us from Our Illusion of Separation, which is kind of a mouthful. And when I started working on this project 8 years ago, nobody knew what I was talking about, but I am finding that more people are resonating with it. So take that phrase, particularly the illusion of separation, and just find a buddy and share a little bit about what you think it means. And I'll say there's probably no wrong answers, because it could be described a lot of different ways. So.
And we have a single person here. If anybody needs a buddy. Nancy? Okay. Oh, you guys are together.
I've heard described as we're all in the same sinking ship. We might decide to rise together on the same ship from how to save ourselves. It's something that affects everybody. It affects some people more than others, but
we'll be part of the sinking ship.
Right.
It's been a while since
The water maybe more like that.
Oh yeah, we can just such a they're trying to, they're always trying to.
I think we just give her the unit, and I think for so long, and then COVID hit.
So no, I like that.
So I think now that there's no more saying what's happening, we're trying to go through the goals, and everyone's realizing that it's all not
So far,
you have community where you might not think.
If one person's doing most of the talking, make sure your buddy gets a chance to share. Just make sure those people are doing they're great.
I was stuff like you removed
neglected the connection.
Oh, are you?
Like that we are, we talk about
We were just talking about misconceptions about and they're like
I wonder if there's a little people with
and any of that true, like a different lifestyle? No, it's just
the things that are I mean the Amish are really, and then because there is the brethren, so I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Even amidst the differences, just stay out connected as well. But the brethren, Mennonite, and then the Amish, and the Mennonites also have some lifestyle things.
okay.
There's something I think about someone
They're all based in the same.
No, they're really totally different. Part of just that somehow they got the name. It's so easy to see because I think he's in a much larger component of the other main Nazi
If you can start wrapping up your thoughts.
misconception. I think it's totally a crisis for the Nazi
Right.
not necessarily
Yeah.
But you know,
Then you need to become more.
All right. If you can close out those conversations. I love that you all jumped in and are not done talking. Yes. All right. Thank you, friends.
oh, that's awesome.
So I would love to hear a few kind of distilled comments of what you talked about. If anybody wants to share just a few words about what those words mean to you. Go ahead.
I first want to say that we're all in the same sinking ship.
We're all in the same sinking ship. Yeah.
And then I added, because I worked with it, but then we all need to work together if we want to survive.
Right. One thing I sometimes say about climate change is that it's like we're all on the Titanic together. Some people have lifeboats and some people don't. But we're all on the same ship, and there are people who want us to fight over the lifeboats rather than turning the direction of the ship. So, how about a few more?
I want to add on to that. My partner said, you know, what you're seeing is communities pull together in the face of climate disasters, and that and maybe that's the model for, maybe that's the model for the whole world is that the communities pull together in the face of climate disasters. Although I hope it happens before we have complete disasters.
Well, that's right, and that was part of the inspiration of this book for me. For example, I interviewed a man in India who started working in disaster relief in Bangladesh, and that was what motivated him to become a global climate advocate, was seeing the impact of flooding. And when I was in India, he said that, not that long before, there were these terrible floods, like incredible numbers of people lost their homes. And Sikhs were feeding everybody. Muslims were welcoming Hindus to their mosques for refuge. This in a country with rising Hindu nationalism. So politically, again, there are people who want us to fight over the lifeboats, but often in disasters, not everybody, but most people's impulse is to help the neighbor.
Yeah.
So that is a hopeful thing that we need to translate into, moving the ship, not just recovering. How about one or two more? Anybody else want to jump in?
I was thinking that we're in a nation where a lot of the people who came here learned to be separated from people because they came here and separated and left people behind. And so, my partner said the thing about in a crisis, people come together, but I think it's also knowing the need, and this is too big to take on by ourselves, and it's obviously too big.
And I I appreciate that. One of the layers of that phrase, the illusion of separation, that I didn't expect, but in my book research I found how much history is part of it. Like that we think that we're separate from our history, but you know, that the history of the Irish famine that made my people leave home, leave their siblings, their parents, and the land. I never really understood, like, what is it with Irish people and shamrocks everywhere on St. Patrick's Day? And then I realized, oh, it's a symbol of the land that they left, but it's just gotten commodified in a kind of stupid way, as so many things are. And the individualism that is part of U.S. culture and capitalism and things like that. So that's great. Thank you, everybody, for jumping in. You already talked one, so we'll hold on. Anybody else with a burning thing to say?
Yeah, while you're talking, I was thinking about, like, I'm in climate work with water restoration, and what I'm really seeing across the board is that we have to bring in nature-based solutions with, like, green technology. And I think that that's the common ground, and indigenous culture already knows, or people already know to work with the earth. So that's what when I thought of common ground, is like we literally have to kind of create a relationship with the earth again.
Absolutely. So that is certainly another layer of it. I'll say for myself, when I sort of started getting interested in this topic, it really was the idea of people coming together with each other that sparked first. The first paragraph of the book is about going to a climate rally in Washington, D.C. It was very, very cold in 2013. People usually remember if they were there because it was the really cold one. But there was a speaker, Chief Jackie Thomas from a First Nations community, who was telling the story of Enbridge, who some of you know, living in Minnesota.
Oh, yes.
Enbridge was trying to build the Northern Gateway pipeline, and Indigenous people, First Nations people in Canada realized that communities were getting really sick living near the tar sands, and so they started campaigning against these pipelines and actually won that fight against the Northern Gateway pipeline. And Jackie Thomas said, I really have to thank Enbridge for bringing our communities together, because ranchers and Indigenous people worked together to stop it because they all had a stake in keeping their water clean. And she said, never before in my life have I seen white and Native people work together. And that really hit me, like, oh, maybe there's something hopeful about this moment. And that was a few years before Standing Rock and other campaigns that got more attention in the United States. As I started traveling, which to be honest was a very kind of serendipitous process. I know there's some Quakers here tonight, but not everybody's a Quaker. We have this phrase, way opening, which is kind of like serendipity works in a way that feels sort of amazing. So I would get invited to give a talk somewhere, and then I would just plan to stay a little extra time. And again, amazing serendipity. Hello, welcome. Opened, and I ended up going to places like the Navajo Nation or Louisiana for a couple of trips, and getting to spend time with communities who really were on the front line of fossil fuel extraction. And you see pretty quickly that when these campaigns happen, they're often hard, and they don't always win. So I was like, I feel like I'm following Spirit all over the place, and why is Spirit bringing me so many places where people didn't necessarily win the campaign, right? I thought I was gonna write this really encouraging book. But the interesting thing is the timing of its publication is, I feel like it's exactly the moment to grapple with, why don't we win more? Because we're not winning. We're not winning on climate. We're not winning on probably any issue that anybody here cares about. Probably, right? And so learning from what has gone well and learning what we're up against was part of my motivation. So the first chapter tells the story of me grappling with like the power that we're up against. I went to the Louisiana oil and gas industry meeting in New Orleans. Yeah, I put on my only pair of high heels and my kind of most mainstream looking dress and tried to kind of keep a low profile while I listened to the oil and gas industry talk to each other and listened to regulators talk to them, which was kind of the most disconcerting part, because the people tasked with protecting us and the environment were very, very chummy with the oil and gas industry. Now, this was under the first Trump administration, but to be honest, that is not, it's not a partisan problem, it's a perennial problem. And that experience taught me a lot about the illusion of separation. First of all, there was a panel with some oil industry people complaining about how hard deep sea drilling was getting because of all these hurricanes and rising sea level and flooding of the roads that they needed to take to get to the launch part. And I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, I know that Exxon knew about climate change in the 1970s. And there's a lot of evidence that they and Shell suppressed that information. Do these guys really not know? You know, is it just not good for their careers to mention this out loud? Like, what is going on here? It was especially striking because we were in a hotel that flooded during Hurricane Katrina. Wow. So I found myself returning to Louisiana. The dynamics in Louisiana are the same as across our country, but they're just really flagrant in Louisiana because of Katrina, because of an area called Cancer Alley. Curious how many people? Yeah, the other end of the Mississippi River, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. There are, depending on how you count them, between 1 and 200 petrochemical facilities along the riverfront. I went to one of them with Joy, my friend from Philly, who's here. And very often, the land that petrochemical facilities bought were old sugarcane plantations that kind of fan out from the river because business wants river access. So they bought up the same property, which was one of the structural reasons that you end up with so many black communities in between, because those communities tended to be on the strips of land between these big historic plantations. And it's already harder for those communities to get a loan or sell their house at a fair price, and now once you're next to a Shell chemical plant, really nobody wants to buy your home. So one of the stories is of a woman, Margie Richard, in Norco, Louisiana, named for the New Orleans Refining Company, who successfully got Shell to reduce their pollution, but also to buy out the homes of people in her community who wanted to move, but couldn't afford to move because of what they had done to their property values. In this LaMoga conference, the oil and gas industry people didn't talk about those communities at all, except on one panel where they talked about them as potential plaintiffs, people who might sue them because of the pollution. And that particular panel was led by people from Texas who were sharing with people from Louisiana how to elect pro-industry judges, which was also very disconcerting for me. The bright spot of this 2-day conference for me was when some of my friends from New Orleans interrupted it. Some activists came in and they were singing this song, "People Gonna Rise Like the Water," and disrupted the whole thing. And they had found out that I was gonna be there, and so I was like texting their police liaison, and most of the industry people got up and left, but some hung around the periphery of the room listening. And the 7 activists who were arrested fairly quickly talked about climate change. They talked about environmental racism. They talked about the fact that it was a global day of action for youth that day. And they talked about the UN climate report that had come out not that long before that. And what was interesting for me was noticing how, once they were gone and the conference resumed, that they did not stop this conference from happening, but they did puncture the illusion of separation just a little bit. The speakers then started addressing things that the activists had raised. A congressman said, well, maybe the climate's changing, but we should deal with it in a pro-industry way. So there was a lot of kind of devil talk, but he was the first person I heard use the phrase climate change. Another speaker mentioned environmental racism, but said well, people decided to move into these neighborhoods, which is really not true of most of the communities in Cancer Alley. After the other thing that happened because of the activists was I stayed in the room and took pictures, and that made me suddenly noticeable. And so when the conference resumed, this industry woman comes over to me what is your name? And you're copying down my name. I know, I was suddenly scared. I realized I'm kind of brave in a group, but by myself, surrounded by 300 people with a completely different worldview, I was really scared of these people then. And the head of the Exxon Baton Rouge refinery or PR team started following me on Twitter, and I was oh my gosh. But the bigger thing was that I felt so alienated. And so I'm going to read a tiny bit of the book where I was processing that experience. The book is organized by chapters, and at the end of every chapter, I kind of tell my own learnings from a situation, whereas the story is usually quoting other people for the most part. So one of the things I talk about is this. So, I have to.
There, I can.
Okay, thank you.
Are you okay with water or?
Oh, I'm okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And on coughing, I'm not safe. Thank you. When I talk a lot. So I was thinking about the fact that my dad worked on a Sun oil tanker, and my great-grandfathers were coal miners. And when I had spent a bunch of time in Louisiana with the people living near refineries, I started to really want to talk to some of the workers. And then kind of the universe sent me people in this kind of funny way, and I had great conversations with them. I could have compassion for why someone would take a high-paying job that is often dangerous, and a lot of chemical exposure. But it was those executives, those are the people I was really struggling with. At the conference happy hour, I tried approaching a few women, but struggled to chit-chat, even though I normally love engaging strangers. I believe that on a spiritual level, we are all part of a larger whole, but it felt like a thin fish line of connection, hard to see under the hotel chandeliers. Although I had gone to hear their side of the story, I couldn't stop the running critique in my head about how delusional they were. Did my Quaker belief that there is that of God in every person mean I had to see the divinity in them? I believed it did, but I wasn't sure how to do that, given that companies like Exxon were responsible for an unfathomable amount of harm. The human death toll from climate change could easily be in the hundreds of millions. I boiled down my dilemma to a challenging theological question. How do I love my neighbor when he is killing my other neighbors? Back home, I shared my Lamoga experience with the Quaker Support and Accountability Committee that meets with me regularly to help me stay in touch with Spirit's guidance for my work. One member said she could empathize with industry's feeling of victimhood, which I had pointed out with incredulity. It's true that people want to sue them, she said. It's true that people want them to pay more taxes, one of the recurring complaints at the conference. Put this way, by a woman of color who is quick to empathize with those hurt by industry, I could glimpse how executives felt beleaguered. From their worldview, they were just defending their profits, which was their obligation to their shareholders in a capitalist system. So after that, I started as a thought experiment trying to think is there anything they said that I could agree with? And it was a strain, but I did start realizing kind of points of connection. And one had to do with our relationship with the natural world. there was this one speaker, Scott Angel, who at the time was Trump's appointee, who had rolled back regulation on deep sea drilling. This is after the BP oil disaster. And learning about that disaster helped me realize how much I don't understand the interconnection of the natural world. One of the statistics that blew my mind, which maybe will make sense to you all more quickly, was that 80% of pelican eggs in northern Minnesota had BP oil in them or the chemicals used to sink the oil a year after the BP disaster. Now, like, that perplexed me for longer than I care to admit. Who can raise their hand and say, why would the birds in Minnesota have BP oil in them a year later? Migration, right? You all get it. The Mississippi River is like the biggest migratory path for birds in the United States. I also read a study that that was trying to predict how many turtles would migrate from the Gulf to West Africa and bring BP oil with them, right? So this spreading, this interconnection of species was something that I kind of was learning gradually through this process, through communities that very often notice the pollution in their own community because their chickens got sick first, or the lettuce, melted or something. But this guy at the conference, Scott Angel, was hailed as a great environmentalist because he really promoted hunting and fishing. And so here's another bit of my reflecting on what I have in common with these folks. It was humbling to acknowledge ways I could relate to the Lamoga speakers. Not so long ago, I thought of the environment as a place to camp on vacation, rather than the air I breathe and the water I drink. Not so long ago, I was unaware that my daughter's asthma was likely caused by an oil refinery in a neighborhood only a few miles away from our home. And not so long ago, I thought that choosing the green fund for my retirement account meant that I wasn't investing in fossil fuels, when in fact I was. It was easy to believe that I wasn't part of the problem, though of course that is part of the illusion of separation. So what I want to say about that is we can all be connected, we can all be invested, but we're not invested equally. I still think those people who are executives of oil and gas companies, my approach is I try and judge people in proportion to their power, and they have a lot. They just got an $18 billion tax and regulation break from the Trump administration, and they're part of the reason he was reelected. Like, that industry heavily backed him, who had made these promises. So one of the things the book grapples with is what Dr. King called building love and power. So how do we acknowledge our interconnection, even being interconnected with people doing great harm, without letting them off the hook? Because there's a kind of spiritual, like, let's all just love each other and then the world will be good. Those people usually don't live next to oil refineries, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you are faced with the harm being done, you're more likely to understand the need to stand up to them. So the other story that I'll tell tonight is the story of the Line 3 campaign, which was a place that was very deeply moving for me in integrating that belief that we're all relations, that the people doing harm on the other side of the fence are our relatives, and a belief that so are the clams that are dying in the river from the heat, and so are the fish that are getting the chemicals that happen, that spill when you're trying to put a pipeline under an amazing number of fresh bodies of water in northern Minnesota. So I'm curious, how many people here spent any time at all at Line 3? I know there was some. All right. Thank you for being here. I don't want to kind of go down this rabbit hole too much, but is there anybody who wants to share anything briefly about how that experience affected them? It was was a hard experience for some people and inspiring and lots of things, I think.
There's no wrong
Any
answer.
takers? There's no wrong answer.
No wrong answer.
Go ahead.
I'll just share that I think the thing that struck me the most is
I'll repeat what you say into the mic for people who
okay,
can't hear you.
thank you. I'll try to speak up. The thing that struck me the most was how much corruption was involved and how Enbridge paid the local police community to surveil and protect their equipment, which creates a pretty significant conflict of interest for law enforcement who are meant to protect the public, or at least that's what we're told, right? And so the amount of surveillance and corruption that was involved in that area, and kind of being subjected to that myself was really illuminating.
So just to kind of encapsulate, like witnessing the amount of corruption, the money that this company was giving to local law enforcement, who then violently defended the company's property, just to be a little more blunt. And experiencing it yourself is really illuminating. And I think that that's true of many people who get involved in corporate campaigns and see firsthand what corporations get away with and which politicians are beholden to them, which is most of them. It can, it's a rapid political education.
You know, I have a coda to the Line 3 story. So my husband works with the Red Lake Nation, and the people up there said, well, we lost the battle, but we're going to win the war. And the situation now is that Enbridge has to pay, they need energy to run the pipeline, and they have to, by state law that's been passed, they have to use renewable energy to run their pipelines.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories where a campaign might have lost like the major thing they were fighting for, but they did get concessions from the company. So I try to tell that part of the story because it's really easy to feel like nothing we did mattered, which I don't believe is true ever. The other thing I'll say is that one of the stories I tell early on in the book is the Baton Rouge bus boycott. I'm curious how many people have heard of the Baton Rouge bus boycott? Okay. There's one history geek in every crowd. Most people haven't because they lost. It only lasted a week. It was a few years before Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. And what they learned was that people need to go to work. And if you don't figure out some other way for people to go to work, they won't be able to sustain a boycott. So when Rosa Parks got arrested and Dr. King got nominated to be the spokesperson for his first campaign, Nonviolent Direct Action, the folks in Baton Rouge called them and said, this is what we learned. And that's why Montgomery was able to sustain the boycott for over a year. It was a landmark win that really launched a lot of direct action. So I tell these stories in that spirit, right? Of like, we're at a moment where we really need to learn what's working and what isn't, especially in taking on billionaires, so that the next campaign can be the one that pushes further. I'm just going to read a little part from the Line 3 story, and then we have a special song before we transition to Q&A. I spent about a month at the Red Lake Treaty Camp, but it was in two different visits. And I was leaving when the drill arrived. I was leaving after the first time when the drill arrived. And then I watched on Facebook Live all the horrible things that were happening to water protectors who were trying to put their bodies in the way to stop the drilling under the Red Lake River. And then I felt really like I needed to come back. I organized a solidarity action in Philly and felt really good about people far away praying for my friends in Minnesota, but it didn't feel sufficient. So I came back And here's just a little bit of that experience. As the whole camp struggled to regroup, a new wave of Indigenous youth organized a prayer action at the Red Lake River over the installed pipeline. They hoped the police wouldn't interfere now that the damage was done. Most people sang prayers on floating wooden rafts that had been pushed upstream to the site. I was one of 6 white allies, or accomplices, asked to stand as a safety barrier between the police and several Indigenous youth, who climbed the Enbridge easement to sing and drum through the chain-link fence between the noisy worksite and the river. In the long skirt I had been taught to wear for ceremonies, I prayed fiercely, holding one of 6 thin wooden shields that were covered with reflective metal, so that the police would see themselves if they looked at us. I was moved by the drumming and plaintive singing around me, and later asked what the words meant. A young Indigenous man with long, thin braids told me that when he was asked to sing a song, he consulted the Creator for guidance, and the words that came to him were a prayer for those doing the harm. They don't know any better, he said quietly. The message of interconnection was reinforced by the presence of our animal relatives at the action. An eagle flew high over the river before we began. An otter bobbed surprisingly close to the first raft as a turtle watched from a protruding rock. Of course, those are our clan animals, one Red Lake elder explained. I was not raised with a worldview that allowed for animals attending prayer protests. But as I wandered between the otter and the turtle on my way to the Enbridge fence, I remembered Robin Wall Kimmerer saying that those of us moving toward the green path are aided by other living beings who want to live too. So my friend Dwight, who I've referenced, is an artist along with his partner Otto. And one of the things we've been talking about is we need art, we need music, we need song and spirituality and paying attention to our bodies and all kinds of ways to process the hard things that are happening in our world and to be able to sustain continuing to work for a better world. So I'm very thrilled and honored that Autumn Brown is going to sing a song for us. And then we'll do a little Q&A, and if we have time, I might read one more short bit. But Autumn, I didn't get a chance to check with you. I was told that you describe yourself as an artist, a theologian, the mother of dragons,
Yes.
and something else. A writer.
Well, also that.
And also a writer.
Yeah.
And so,
Thank you.
turn it over.
Well, we're going to come up together to introduce our music.
Yeah, and
Dwight is a clone.
Dwight is a Quaker clown.
And Quaker clone, artist, conflict expert. Quaker clone, artist, conflict expert. Did you want to say a few words, Love?
Sure.
Oh, there's 2 mics.
Yeah.
There's 2 mics. I feel like I should have said more about Dwight.
No. Because we want to get back to we want to get back to Q&A, but
Okay.
I'll just share. It's so great to be here. So honored to be here. I got to be with Eileen in one part of your trip down in Louisiana, as you said, and it was really illuminating and eye-opening for me to be there. And so I'm so grateful. I tell you this all the time for you being faithful to what you're being called to do in writing this book. And the ways that I just see art connecting with the realities that we're facing. One of the things I talk about a lot in my conflict work is that the imagination and creativity is often the first thing to go when we're afraid. And creativity in art actually keeps us really in touch with our imagination and creativity, which is necessary to build a world that many of us, when we rest down, when we're together in community, like we can sense that it's coming, it's being born, it's asking to be ushered into. And so, when I just said, Eileen, can we do a little song just to bring that into? So, and I feel honored to support my partner, Autumn Brown, in her work, and she's going to share a little bit about the song that we're going to share today.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing me in, and thank you for your book. And wow, so importantly timed. I feel like your book is a way opening. And I really appreciate this last story you just shared about the Indigenous youth introducing this idea of, just asking the creator what needs to be sung. And because my experience with songwriting specifically, I think for a lot of artists, the experience is that you feel that it's not something that you're creating, but it's like, I get emotional, I'll probably get emotional talking about this, but it really feels like something that channels through and doesn't belong to me, but just belongs in the world, and I am a very grateful vessel for this song in particular. It's called Don't Be Afraid, and truly this song is one that I had been improvising at my piano for a couple of hours, and then the song kind of like came through in complete form one night, late at night. And then later, as a part of our falling in love process, Dwight made beats for the song, which was really cool. Love is awesome. But I share that because what the song is about has revealed itself to me over time. And I know that one of the things that the song is about is climate grief, and really being at peace with all that we are losing and all that we will lose, and really, really shifting our relationship to death and dying. So that's a little bit about the song. So I invite you, it's okay, I have a little bit of on there. But I really invite you to this is a nice, small, intimate environment, and you can be in the experience of this music in whatever way you want to be. You don't have to watch me. You can watch me. I'm nice to look at, but you can also just if it helps you to just close your eyes, or to have a heavy lidded gaze and be in a kind of meditative experience of this music, please feel free to do that too. Okay? Thank you. How did you find that? You're amazing. The bag opened. Here we go.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Come down from your can't you see?
Oh, we also need more hugs.
I don't want to go too far over time so that I can hug some of you, but thank you. And I think rather than reading at the end, I'll just connect the end of the book to the song. The last chapter is about the campaign against Vanguard, which I joined when I went home from Line 3. Turned out Vanguard is the biggest investor in Enbridge, Exxon, and all the bad companies in my book, basically. But the very final story, my friend Daniel Hunter worked in the climate movement for a long time before becoming known for defending democracy work. And I asked him about hope and whether he felt hopeful. And he told the story of being on the Delaware River in a canoe with his daughter, who was 2 at the time, and they capsized, right? Every parent, hunches, right? They were kind of in a grove, but still there was a strong current, and he was strong and started swimming, and then felt like they weren't going to make it, like they might not make it to shore, and fear set in. And then he had a moment of realizing that being afraid wasn't helping him to swim any better. And even if it wasn't guaranteed that they'd make the shore, it didn't matter. He still had to just keep swimming. But once he kind of let go of the fear and just moved forward, swimming actually became easier.
Wow.
So the connection I feel with that song is that facing our worst fears is part of the work of trying to minimize the possibility of it happening, that it's not fatalistic, but that grappling with fear will help us choose the green path, as the Anishinaabe prophecy says. I would love to just quickly take a couple of questions, and then Sarah is waiting to sell you books.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for this. And I'm really challenged by this idea of loving the person who's killing my, whatever you said, and also really seeking that understanding of connection while also holding on to my different views about things and holding on to the integrity. I'm just wondering if you have any words of wisdom about that process. I mean, maybe each of us has to figure out what's easier for us and what's harder for us and navigate that place. But I'm just captivated by it.
I think there's so much in that to me is part of the work of this time. First of all, love, like Dr. King talked about love all the time. It's like, I'm not talking about an easy kind of love here, This isn't just like heart emojis, But one way I think about it, so to me there's a spiritual and a strategic level, and so just to speak frankly about the Democratic Party, like calling Trump voters deplorables, which Hillary Clinton did, or trash, which I think it was Joe Biden did, backfires politically. Like the way we talk about people who don't share our politics pushes them further. And it's not all our fault that they're further over there, right? There's a lot going on and a lot of hate speech and divide and conquer and stuff. But to actually shift things on climate or on any other issue, including voting rights, democracy, we have to shift some people this way. And so that's not going to be everybody's work. Some people are just not going to be the people to knock on those doors and talk to those folks, and that's fine. But somebody's got to do it. And just calling people names on Facebook is not gonna win the day, strategically, right?
Yeah, thank you.
For me, the thing I said earlier about distinguishing who has more power is helpful. There are people who I know who don't vote the same as me, who don't have much power, and that makes it easier for me to talk to them. But even so Dwight, I keep mentioning, Dwight and I also went to a corporate shareholder meeting and interrupted the CEO together, along with some other members of Earthquaker Action Team. And it was a little scary, yeah. But it was a few months after I went to that oil and gas meeting, and that experience of trying to see things from that point of view changed how I spoke to the CEO. And I started by saying, I know that you're under pressure from your shareholders to make more money for them, and you think that's really all your job is. And we're asking you to do something that is not what you were hired to do, but let's explain why. You know, this is a more important obligation. I felt like I learned from that experience. Dwight didn't need that experience. Dwight was right in there speaking to the soul of this CEO, who then offered to meet with us, which their corporation had refused to do for a couple of years. So there's something to me about strategy and spirit being aligned on this issue, which is not to say I do it perfectly all the time. Anybody else?
So I was part of the protest movement in the late 90s. I lived in Eugene, Oregon at that point, one that led the WTO protest. Found that in the creation of spontaneous communities, as things played out, there was a lot of helping and a lot of giving and receiving of care, of food, and found that was probably the most important connector for all of us. To that end, I've brought some organic food for everybody to take home. If you don't feel comfortable keeping it for yourself, please consider handing it directly to somebody in need and look them in the eyes. I think in our society we have, I'm sorry to speak when you're here, I guess this is the end, but in this society it's very, very hard to both give and receive, and I think it's important to explore that discomfort. Why do we feel uncomfortable receiving? Why do we feel undeserving if we have a certain amount of dollars in our bank account? So I would like to, and I guess the question I would like to ask you is, in your activism, how did you grapple with the giving and receiving?
Thank you. Just real briefly, I'll say my previous book was a memoir of why I started doing civil disobedience at age 50. And partly it was, I had been in the Peace Corps in Botswana and then went back 25 years after and got to see what climate change was doing to this place that I loved. But one of the things I learned in Botswana was that it's a culture that's very much about reciprocity. The word for borrow and the word for lend are the same word, because it doesn't really matter who owned it originally. So it was really hard teaching kids English to distinguish between borrowing and lending. But it was also, there was a dynamic where people would stop by and ask to borrow an onion from me or something, and I always gave. I never asked for an onion, and then I realized, oh, I'm supposed to ask too. Like, it's not a real relationship unless we're borrowing and lending from each other. The other connection I'll make with what you said is in the book I share some of the work of Joanna Macy, who some people might know, and she talks about how we need to stop the harm, but we also need to build the communities that we want. And I think a lot of people have written about resistance camps are a place where people practice living in community, and sharing food is certainly a big part of that, so thank you. Sarah, do we have time for one? One more. Go ahead.
Just
I should have saved this for last. In a world of 8 billion people, I see the Quakers making wonderful 30 people groups that work. And I was wondering, have you ever figured out how to scale that up?
Well, for people who are unfamiliar with Quakers, there's a few in the house tonight. I think that we need both small and big at the moment. So we need local, like I have a local community at home praying for me, and I'm really grateful for that smaller group of people. I think rather than scaling up Quakers, I think we have been at our best in social movements when we have played a role in the ecosystem and not imagined that we're the whole garden, right? And in Philadelphia, there's an interfaith effort now forming to do civil disobedience around ICE, that has a lot of different people of faith showing up, wanting to bring spiritual grounding. And Quakers will be one piece, it will be one plant in the garden. We're not the whole garden. So I think that's my response to that. I think we have an important role to play, but it's not in isolation. That seems like a good place to end.
Yeah.